Hi kids. In this video, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about finding distances on the coordinate plane. Now, before I open up the book and we go into the book lesson, I'm going to go over these basic steps. Okay, you may want to write them down in your notebook. When you're finding distances on the coordinate plane, number one, locate the points and write the coordinates. So the first thing you do is you locate your points or the place you're going, and you write down the coordinates. Then number two, you determine the points which share an axis. Okay, now usually you'll find points that will have a common axis. They will both fall on the y-axis or fall on the x-axis. Check to see if the points are in the same quadrant. This is very important. If the points are in the same quadrant, then you have a different operation to do. Use absolute values for the common points. So the common points would be points that share the same axis. Okay? If the common points are in different quadrants and cross an axis, add the absolute values. That's important. If the common points are in the same quadrant, if they are in the same quadrant, okay, and do not cross an axis, then subtract the absolute values. Okay, so these are the steps. Just for the important steps would be to number one, write down your coordinates, and then check to see whether or not your common points are in the same quadrant, then or not in the same quadrant, then to decide whether or not you're going to add absolute values or subtract absolute values. Okay, so let's take a look at how the book presents it to us. You're going to want to pause the video and open up your book to pages 214 and 215 so you can follow along. Okay, now in the book they have a problem for you, the distance on the coordinate plane. How can you find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane? Tammy drew a map of her neighborhood. How far is it from Lee's house to school? Well, right here is Lee's house, and here's the school. Now, the important thing is to realize that the units have been defined as a distance of 1 mile. So each of these units, whether you're going left or right, up or down, has a distance of 1 mile. Okay, now the obvious thing to do in this case, and the easiest thing to do, would be simply to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that would equate to 5 miles. But sometimes the maps are not this easy, and you have to do a little bit more adding and subtracting. So let's take a look at what they talk about on page 215 in the book. On page 215, they give you the 2 steps for finding these distances, the distance. Okay? The first thing they tell you to do is find the coordinates of Lee's house and the school. So the coordinates for Lee's house will be -4, -3. That's the coordinates of Lee's house. It's right here. Okay? Find the location on the map, follow the grid lines, follow the grid line directly to the x-axis to find the y-coordinate. So again, you would come over here and you'd see that she is on -4. Follow the grid line directly to the y-axis to find the y-coordinate. So that it'd be -3, and that's how you found it. The coordinates for Lee's house are -4, -3. The coordinates for the school would be -4, +2. So at this point, you'd notice that they both have -4 as the x-axis, and they have -3 and +2 for the y-axis. So there's a difference. Okay? So now we've found the coordinates. Because the x-coordinates are the same, you can use the y-coordinates to find the distance between Lee's house and the school. So in other words, the common coordinates are going to fall on the -4. So your common coordinates that you're going to work with would be the -3 and 2. They're the ones that are on the same line. Okay, they are in the same x coordinate there. Okay, so anyways, the absolute values of the y coordinates tell you the distance between each point and the x-axis. So in other words, when you look at this, you can see that we have Lee's house has a distance of 3. So we're going to say that the absolute value of -3 is what we want to use for Lee's house, because we're going to go that distance to the x, and then we're going to hop over and find the absolute value up to the school from the x. So we would then use the +2, and we would have an absolute value of -3 and an absolute value of 2. Okay, so we'd have these two values here. And what we're going to do is the distance from Lee's house to school is, as they wrote it, the absolute value of 2 plus the absolute value of -3, which would equal the math sentence of 2 plus 3. And that would equal 5 miles. So in other words, basically what we did was we determined a common coordinate line, okay, and that was on -4. They were both on -4, and then all we had to do was determine the absolute values above and below. So what they've done is they've crossed over an axis. They are in different, the two locations are in different quadrants, so what we're going to do is add. So we would simply take the absolute value of -3 and add it to the absolute value of +2, and we would get 5. Okay? Alrighty, let's try a few practice problems. In your book, okay, there's some questions related to the playground and the map that you had up above. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can answer 1, 2, and 3. Pause the video now. Okay, let's take a look at this. All right, they want us to find the distance between each pair of points. Okay, so let's label this point A and this point B. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to establish some information here. Okay, well, in this case, okay, for number 1, we will see, for number 1, we will see that we have -5 and +2. -5, +6. So if we were to actually plot those on the map here, we would come over -5 and up 2, and we would be right here for that point A. Then we would have -5, +6, which would be way up here, and that would be point B. So we want to know the distance from there to there. Well, in this case, we would find out that we have -5 as our common number, so we're going to use the uncommon, and we're going to find the absolute value of 2, which is 2, the absolute value of 6, which is 6, and then we will subtract in this case. So we will have 6 minus 2 equals 4, because the points are in quadrant 2. That's why we subtracted. We are not crossing an axis. We're in the same quadrant, so we'd want to use subtraction to determine our distance. And we could check it by counting 1, 2, 3, 4. So our answer, 4 miles, is correct. Okay, let's take a look at problem number 2. Problem number 2, okay, let's just label these points C and D so we can get them on the map there if we want to. The answer for this one is -3 and -1, the coordinates of -3, -1, and +2, -1. So in this case, we can see that the common coordinate is in the Y line, Okay, so we're going to use the absolute value from negative 3 and the absolute value from positive 2, and we'll get the absolute value of negative 3 will be 3. The absolute value of positive 2 will be 2. And you do cross an axis. So in other words, if we were to find this first point, point C, it would be negative 3, negative 1 right here. That would be point 3. And then if we were to find point D, it would be positive 2, negative 1. And that's point D. And you can see they are on the same line here, but they cross an axis, which means we're going to use addition. All right, and basically the absolute value from negative 3, negative 1, the absolute value would be 3. 3 units, 1, 2, 3. The absolute value for positive 2, negative 1 would be 1, 2. So these points establish these absolute values, which we add for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 units, or 5 miles. Remember, you cross an axis, so you're going to add the absolute values. Okay, let's take a look at number 3. See if you got number 3 right. So in this case, we would have, let's go with point E and G so we can locate them on a map. You didn't have to do that. So we have positive 4, negative 3. So we would have positive 4, negative 3, which would be down here, and we'll call that point E. And then we have positive 4, positive 5, which is going to be way up here. Now the first thing you notice is we cross an axis, which means we're going to add absolute values. Well, we're going to use negative 3 because it is our common one is 4, so we're going to use negative 3 and our absolute value will be 3. We're going to use positive 5 and our absolute value will be positive 5. It is crossing an axis, so we're going to use addition. So 3 plus 5 is 8. So the distance from this point to this point would be 8 miles. All right? Okay, let's try another one here. Let's try problems 7 and 8. All right? Pause the video and see if you can solve problem number 7. All right, problem number 7, here we go. How would you use absolute values and addition or subtraction to find each of the following? Well, the distance from Lee's house to the playground. Well, in order to do that, what you would do for number 7a, you would add the absolute values of the y coordinates. Because when you look at Lee's house, okay, it is all the way over, okay, when you look at Lee's house, you would see that you have the absolute value of negative 3, and then you're going to the playground, which is way up here, that's an absolute value of 5. So the values that you're working with are absolute value of negative 3 and the absolute value of 5. So in other words, it would be 3 plus 5. So in other words, to answer number 7, okay, you're going to do this absolute value plus that absolute value. They are crossing the axis, so you're going to add the absolute values. They are on the same negative 4, so you would use the absolute values from there to there. Okay, number 7b, the distance from the school to the playground. How would you use absolute values and addition or subtraction to find each of the following? Well, if you were to look at the distance from the school to the playground, here is the school right here. Here's the playground. They are in the same quadrant, quadrant 2. So in this case, you're going to subtract the absolute values of the y coordinates. In other words, if you were to look at the coordinates, you are actually comparing the school, which is -4, and so you'd come over -4 up +2, and then the other coordinate would be to the playground, which is, again, -4, and you're going all the way up to 5. So in this case, you would then subtract. You can see that -4 is the common, so we want to go with the uncommon, so we'd have 5 and 2, and then you just simply take the absolute value of 5, the absolute value of 2, and you would subtract, and you'd get 3. Okay, so that's how you would use subtraction. Okay, that's how you answer those questions. Try number 8 now. See if you can answer that one. Alright, hopefully you had a chance to answer 8. The question is, to find the distance between 2 points using their coordinates, when do you add their absolute values and when do you subtract them? Well, here's the answer to number 8. When points are in the same quadrant, you will subtract. Add when they are in different quadrants. So when they say to find distances between 2 points using their coordinates, when do you add their absolute values? You add their absolute values when they're in different quadrants. When do you subtract? You subtract when they're in the same quadrant. Okay? So up here, you subtracted. Here, you added. Alright? Alright. Let's have you take a look at the next set of questions in your book. See if you can solve these questions. Okay? Go right on through and see if you can solve these questions. They're a little bit more complicated. Pause the video now. Alright, let's see what we've got here. Let's start with number 17. The answer to number 17 is the distance from roller coaster 1 to the swings over here is a total of 7 units. How did we get 7 units? Well, we could have counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or we could have done the math. And the coordinates for the roller coaster are -6, 7, -6, +7. The swings are at +1, +7. So you take the coordinates, the 7 is common, absolute values that you're going to use, and you're crossing over an axis, so you would add 6 plus 1. Okay? Alright, the answer for number 18, the distance from the Ferris wheel to the roller coaster is 10 units. Alright, and this is how you answered that. The Ferris wheel is located at these coordinates, -6, +2. The roller coaster is number 3 is at -6, -8. So 6 is our common coordinate. They are crossing an axis. So we take the absolute value of 2, the absolute value of -8, and we add the two absolute values to get 10 units. All right? The answer for number 19, is 14 units. Okay? And the reasons it's 14 units is because you establish the coordinates. Here they are. And you see that the common one is the y coordinate. So you're going to have -6 absolute value, +8's absolute value. And because you're going from the Ferris wheel to the merry-go-round, you're crossing over. So you're going to take those absolute values and add them. All right? And for number 20, a little bit more complicated for number 20. They wanted you to do 3 things. So the answer for number 20 is 19 units. And the reason it's 19 units is because first, you have to take the absolute values from coaster to coaster, which would be -3, -8, and you're going to subtract them because they're in the same quadrant, and you'd get 5. Then you would go from roller coaster to water slide, and you would use absolute value of -6 and +8 and get 14, and you would add